Good afternoon. I want to take you on a walkthrough of a 4,000 square foot artificial turf installation. This installation is happening at a school, and what the kids have been playing on looks much like this, where the grass is completely eroded away. Each day at this school, there's approximately 300 children that are going to play in this area behind me, in this just in this 4,000 square foot area. One of the projects that they've asked us to put a bid on was this area behind me, which represents almost 8,000 square feet, just about double the size of this area. So as soon as this project is done, it looks very likely we will be going into this project so it can become a play field slash soccer field for the students of this school. So one of the things that we had to do in order to set up this job is obviously take very, very good measurements. It's vital that you get your measurements correct. Artificial turf is not a cheap product, so you don't want to over order any more than you need to. But the important thing to note is that artificial turf rolls are made on carpet machines, and the rolls come out with a 15-foot width. So in order to optimize your usage of the material, what we do is we measure before the job begins in two directions. We measure from left to right, going this way, and then from, well, that's right to left. And then we measure from left to right, because it's gonna make a big difference how we lay the turf. And in deciding, do we start at, sorry, I'm waving off a couple of bees here. Do we start at this end or do we start at that end? And it's really a game of optimization. Now, in our case, my initial measurements came up with a 49-foot length of this area. And the temptation would be to order the turf 49 feet. And it's actually just short of 49 feet with the tape measure. And I can't tell you how many times I do this 3 and 4 and 5 times, because it's just, even in placing a tape measure by yourself and making a mark in the ground where it ends and then moving it 15 feet to do that, and versus using a measuring wheel, I always order at least 1 extra foot on the turf, sometimes 2 extra feet. But in this case, if I ordered 2 extra feet, that would give me, because we have 6 rolls, that's 90 feet, 6 times 15 equals 90. If I order 2 extra feet, it would be 180 square feet additional. And I didn't want to waste that much product, so I ordered an extra foot. So the rolls were to be 50 feet long. Now, in some of the cases, they sent us rolls that were 52 and 53 feet long, which is great, no big deal on that. But in one instance, they sent us a roll that was 48 feet long. So here's what you run up against. I got this roll 48 feet long, and we know that we have a minimum of 50 feet to cover, 49 feet and some inches to cover. And that put me into a little bit of a panic, because our options become very limited at that point. Either one, we make what's called a butt seam, which in most of these cases, these are linear seams going along the length of the turf. You can see this is what our seams are going to look like. Now, we haven't seamed it in yet. We're just now setting the turf together, so it'll actually be less visible than what it shows here. But to make a butt seam going across the width of the turf can look bad. It can look good. But in an area like this, we have so much visibility on this project, we really need this to look perfect. I mean, we can't have any margin for error. So also, we are right on schedule. This is day 3 of the job. So in 2 days, we have prepped it. And the prep, there's part of our dirt pile. We have trucked off 4 truckloads of dirt so far, which is almost 80 cubic yards of dirt we have taken out of this area. If you looked at the space before it started, you would never know that it would be that much dirt. It was just a minor hump in this area. It was otherwise relatively flat, and you look at it, you're like, oh, that's ready to go, but it's not. So we trucked off 4 truckloads of dirt. We've brought in 4, well, really 3.5. We haven't used half of the truckload. We brought in about 3.5 truckloads of crusher run fill material to fill to a depth of 4 inches across this whole area. We rented from Sunbelt. You can see that vibratory rolling compactor, drive-on compactor. You have to have one. Could never do this all with here's our plate compactor, but you do not want to use a plate compactor for 4,000 square feet. So we rented that ride-on vibratory rolling compactor for this project. And going back to that so we're right on target. The 2 days that was our prep, we're halfway through day 3. The turf is down, it's ready to be seamed. The turf showed up. So had we decided to move forward with replacing that 48-foot roll, I've called the manufacturer, I asked, why did you guys do this? Why didn't you cut it to a 50-foot roll? And they explained that it was a mistake. They meant to, but they didn't. We'd be up a creek right now, because that would take an extra week to get that one roll in. And who knows what kind of elements or rain or situation that we'd be in waiting an extra week, not to mention the fact that we're 2 days away from finishing and we want to get paid. There's a big final payment to collect. So Eduardo came up with a wonderful idea. I looked at this yesterday for probably an hour, measuring and remeasuring. How can we make this 48-foot roll work without putting in a butt seam? And the answer was we couldn't. So we decided we're going to move forward with a butt seam. We've done it successfully before. It's absolutely not my favorite thing to do. But one of the things that you look at here, and I'm going to roll this turf back so you can see it. Hopefully these guys don't get too mad at me for doing that, is this concrete bump out right here. So because the width of this is only 81 feet, the length is 50, the width is 81 feet. I ordered 6 rolls of turf. That's 90 feet. It means I have 9 feet of wiggle room to move a roll this way. See, on all my calculations, I was assuming we'd start at this end and move down that way and leave our last piece towards the end. But now I'm realizing if we start at that end and move our last piece here with this bump out is about 3 feet. You see that, how that concrete comes out, about 3 feet? With that bump out, that makes this roll of turf 46 feet, less than 48. We can make it. We can make it with that piece of turf. But in a even more ironic twist of good luck and fortune, we laid out that 48-foot roll as our last piece, and it actually, which means they didn't cut it to 48 feet. They actually cut it to 49 feet and a few inches. So even though it was labeled 48 feet, it was 49 feet plus just a few inches. So here's what I'm left with. Let's see if we can take a look at that. Right here is the end. This is my border right there. Here's the turf. When I peel this back, which I'm not going to do because the guys are cutting it right now, this will lay here with about 1 inch extra to spare. So despite the fact that I could hardly sleep last night because I was figuring out in my mind, dreaming about how we're going to make this butt seam, it turns out it's all going to be good. It would have been good 2 ways. It's good the way it is now, but Eduardo's idea of switching this and starting from this end instead of that end would have worked out because of that bump out. So it gets you through a stressful situation knowing that you don't have to replace the roll. I didn't want to replace the roll and we don't have to. I did not want to make a butt seam and we don't have to, because the visibility on this project is huge. Every parent in the school that's paying tuition, it is a private school, every parent that's paying tuition, every board member, every booster club, all the people that are responsible for making the decision on whether we're going to get to do the next double-size project is watching this. So we have our base prepped. You can see our crusher run base prepped. It's nice and solid, nice and flat. We've run string lines. One of the things that I like to do once we get the turf out is take my shoes off and walk on this area in my socks, because you can actually get a sense or a feel of any bumps or imperfections. I'm going to set my tape measure down. Any bumps or imperfections in the turf. And this is about as perfect as it can possibly get. So the process now is trimming off all these excess pieces that you can see are laying around on the ground here. These are, when the turf comes in, we will trim off these excess pieces. And the way we trim those is with a very, very, very sharp razor blade. And we use these tufting lines. That's what this is called. These are called tufting lines as a guide. We make sure to run our razor right inside of these tufting lines. So you can see in the instance where we make a butt seam, we have to cut across the width. When you cut across the width, you cut through these tufting lines, and they don't always line up with each other. They line up lengthwise, but not widthwise. So what happens is you cut right through the threads. These are the threads of the turf, and it leaves an open spot. So making that seam can be very difficult. Sometimes we'll make a letter S cut on it, or we'll make like a lightning bolt cut on it. to allow it to disappear, hide that seam much easier. But making those types of butt seams take an incredible amount of time and patience and have very, very little margin of error. Longitudinal seams running along the length are much more forgiving to heal together, because you're not cutting through the actual grass. You're cutting in between these lines. You're not cutting through where the grass is actually stitched in. So when we're done, we're going to be using a power broom, which goes on a steel head attachment, and we're going to be using medium grade silica sand. There's all different types of infill products that you can use. Silica sand is perfectly acceptable for play areas that don't have pets and that don't need a G-Max or a fall rating on them. This one does not need a G-Max or a fall rating. So we're using what's called medium grade silica sand. One of the keys to note about silica sand is silica by its nature is very round particles, as opposed to like a mason sand or a river sand that has angular particles. Mason sand, river sand will compact. It will get very heavy. Play sand will get very heavy when it gets wet. Silica sand will not. It drains beautifully. Because of the rounded particles, they're always able to roll on top of each other. So if you get this wet, I couldn't really pack this if it were wet right now. I might be able to just a little bit, but for the most part, I could not pack this into a ball or into a form like I could with play sand or mason sand or even a river sand or any other type of sand. But silica sand works great. So what we do is we put it into a drop spreader. We're going to spread this sand at a rate of about 1 pound per square foot. If this was a taller pile grass, if this was a residential project, we would use a taller pile grass. This is a very short pile grass, probably about 1.25 inches in its pile height, and it won't take as much sand to fill it in. So we're going to go at a rate of about 1 pound per 1,000 square feet, 4,000 square feet. It's going to give us about 80 bags of sand. So it's going to give us, which is roughly 4,000 pounds at 1 pound per square foot. If this were a longer grass, we'd go closer to 1.5 pounds, maybe a really long grass, even 2 pounds per square foot. So the next step is to install the seams. The seams are going to be installed using 12-inch wide seam tape, which is over here. Let me show you the tape and the glue that we're going to use. This is seam tape, and actually this is more than 12 inches wide. They sent me 16-inch wide seam tape. That's what it looks like, isn't it? Okay, so they sent me 16-inch wide seam tape. We're going to take this seam tape. I've seen guys use filter fabric. I don't recommend that. It's not all that special of a product, but go ahead, you got to take it. What we're going to do is lay that out flat, and to it we're going to use this Turf Bond glue. I've also seen, here's another mistake that I've seen a lot of people use indoor-outdoor carpet adhesive from Home Depot or from a big box store. That works temporarily, maybe get you through the first 6 months to a year, but we are under the bright, hot Georgia sun. The high today is going to be about 96 degrees. It is very, very hot out. This artificial turf puts off a lot of heat. Surface temperature is generally going to be about 20 degrees higher than the surface temperature of grass, equally as hot as concrete. So you might think, well, why are we installing it at a school? Well, school is out during the summer, so kids don't actually play on it in the summer. So it's going to be more temperate, I think is the right word, for them during the part of the year that it is in use, which is primarily fall through spring and of course winter. So this area was nothing. When I came and quoted the project, there were tons of kids out here playing, and it was just dust. I mean, I can't even imagine how much red clay dust they were breathing in. I mean, look at this. This is what this ground is made of right now. It's just this fine dust. And of course, when it gets wet, you can see it covering my phone camera. It's just a mess. This stuff you breathe it into your lungs, and it's horrible for you. So this is going to be a humongous upgrade for them. They're going to have a lot of fun on it. So let's talk about the last step, which is going to be to secure it. So I've talked to you about how we measure it, how we cut it, how we install it with the seam tape, and we use a notched trowel. I don't know if I have a trowel with me here. We use a notched trowel to install it. I don't see where our trowel is, but it's here somewhere. We use different tools. This is like a carpet roller. It's got little knobs in it, so when we do the seam, we can go across, back and forth to interlace those fibers so that seam sort of disappears. We've got a lot of specialty cutting tools. This one is great for cutting above through the pile. I use this a lot for organic curves and different shapes like that. This one is great for cutting along the length of the turf. We often find that using a razor blade works just as well in that case. We've got a stretcher. Sometimes we'll need to stretch the seams just a little bit as we're bringing them together so we can bring them together tightly. Tons and tons of square-tipped razor blades. Best blades are carpet blades that have square-tipped corners. You to look at this seam going down and see this is nearly invisible. So the seam is right here. You can see, you can look back from where your eye is and see how the guys are working inch by inch. That's the rule of thumb on how to do these seams, inch by inch. You got one guy working a little bit ahead, bringing the two pieces together, and the second person is putting together literally just inch by inch, kind of folding it together on itself. And I'll walk behind it and just press it in with my foot like that, and that's the beginning of how to make that seam. Now you look, step back, and you start to see what that seam actually looks like. Take a look at that. I mean, it's pretty much invisible. Oh, there's a spot that's sticking up, so we see where the spot's sticking up, and we can quickly go back, fix that, roll that together, just like that. But you're gonna have bad seams if these are not cut straight. And a lot of guys rush these cuts, and if this cut, you see, remember I told you we're following this tufting line right here. So if we don't follow this line correctly or this line correctly and we come across, that seam won't line up and it'll be visible. So doing it this way, taking our time, allows the seam to become as invisible as possible. All right, let's take a look at one of the last steps of this artificial turf project, and that is securing the turf to the crushed stone base below it. And we do that by installing these 6-inch galvanized twisted shank spikes. Now there's a lot of different spikes that you can use. There are steel spikes you can use. There are roofing gutter spikes that are common to use that don't have a twisted shank. Where we are, we find that these work great. They're also readily available at big box stores. The roof gutter spikes are not as easy to get a hold of. So these are nice because if we run short on them, we can just run down the street and pick up more of them. So let's take a look at how this is going. One of the first places we start is along the seams. So where we have it on the seams, what we're going to do is we're going to go about every 8 inches. Here's a seam right here. You can't see, if I show you up close, you can see the seam, but we've gone about every 8 inches and we stagger it. We keep the spike roughly about 4 inches off of the seam. So the seam is right here. We keep the spike about 4 inches off and we stagger them. We alternate and stagger around the seam. That makes the seam nice and secure. This one has not been done yet because we still have to glue that seam in. But I can show you on this seam where you can see that these spikes are. You can almost see an indentation in there. Right down there is that spike in the ground, never gonna move, and that's what holds this down. So we spike it closer around the perimeter, about every 8 inches apart, and along the seam about every 8 inches staggered. And then throughout the field, we go about every 2 feet on center with these spikes. So even without the sand, even without the weight of the sand being added, the seams or the turf is very well anchored down. So you're looking at that and you're thinking, wow, that takes a long time. Isn't there a faster way to do it? Sure, you can go through that and you can quickly just drive in each nail, but when you're done, you're gonna see all these little dimples in the grass. So it is a time-consuming process to go through that much work to put down each individual nail. Believe me, I've tried to think of like inventing a machine that can shoot these nails in like a nail gun and press it in. But underneath there is that crushed stone base. That crushed stone base has some larger pieces of aggregate in it. So when those spikes go in, oftentimes they'll hit a piece of aggregate. So you gotta either move the spike or kind of pound through that aggregate to allow that larger piece of stone to displace and allow the spike to go through. It is time consuming, but when you look at the overall finished end product, you don't see little dimples. And I can't tell you how many finished projects we look at from our competitors where you see a whole bunch of little dimples around, which just tells me that they nailed it really, really fast and probably saved themselves half a day's worth of labor. This is time consuming, but it's worth it. In the end, it looks perfect. I mean, that's how you get that. That's one of those little details. So we have not yet found a faster way to do it, and some jobs just require you to simply be patient and take your time. So that's what we're doing here with nailing the turf. Now, as a last step in this process, I've mentioned before that we're going to be power brooming it. That step is about to get started and underway. We're going to be using the silica sand that I pointed out earlier. I want to give you a close-up look of the power broom itself. This is the power broom that we're going to be using. So after we spread the silica sand, we're going to be taking this power broom on a gas-driven head, and we're going to broom that sand in. The sand serves a few purposes. One, it weighs the grass down. Two, it allows the fibers to stand up straight, making the grass a little bit softer. And three, it protects the backing of the turf. And let me show you the backing of the turf. The backing of the turf looks like this. It protects the backing of the turf. This turf has a UV coating on it. What we don't want is sunlight to come through the top of the turf and not have any sand and be able to reach that backing layer. If it does, this artificial turf job is just about complete. We've got a few more passes with the power broom. We've got a little bit to trim up around the sides, but otherwise this turf job is about 95% complete. I hope this has been an education for you to understand just how easy and yet how complex artificial turf can be. There's a few things that you definitely have to keep an eye on as far as your measurements, your order quantity, how you're putting the seams together, how you're spiking the turf, how you're finishing it all off to make it look very professional and to make it look immaculate when it is all complete, but if done right, it can be a very profitable add-on to your business, especially if you're used to doing hardscapes. You're going to find that turf jobs go much faster. Again, this is a 4,000 square foot installation completed in 4 days. I'm extremely happy with that production rate, and we'll be moving on to hopefully other areas at the same school and other projects similar in size and scope of work. Hope you've enjoyed this artificial turf project. Thanks. Have a great day.